Battlefield hat Call of Duty besiegt. Und das wollen wir uns heute anschauen in einem 15-Minuten-Video vom lieben Tactical Brit. Den habe ich auch in Los Angeles kennengelernt. Es scheint tatsächlich so zu sein, als hätte Battlefield zum ersten Mal, glaube ich, in der Geschichte einen Call of Duty Release besiegt. Und das ist sehr, sehr verrückt. Und das habe ich auch nicht für möglich gehalten, weil in der Vergangenheit war es so, dass ein schlechter Call of Duty Release immer noch besser war als ein guter Battlefield Release. Dieses Jahr ist es zum ersten Mal so, dass das nicht mehr so ist. Und ich habe es nicht für möglich gehalten und ich freue mich extrem darüber, dass es scheinbar wirklich so eingetroffen ist. Denn ihr wisst, was wir seit Jahren sagen, wir Call of Duty Creator. Vielleicht nicht alle. Es gibt welche, die schon auch so ein bisschen nicht ganz ihre Meinung sagen, wie auch immer. So, Aber wir wünschen uns Konkurrenz. Wir wünschen uns das, nicht damit Call of Duty untergeht, weil wir sagen, das ist Kacke und wir wollen, dass es stirbt. Sondern weil wir wollen, dass sie gezwungen sind, etwas Besseres zu bringen. Dass sie gezwungen sind, etwas zu machen, was die Community sich wünscht und was sie sich auch verdient hat, muss man sagen. Die letzten Jahre Call of Duty, es war immer irgendwas, was wirklich richtig reingekackt hat und sie kamen halt immer damit durch, weil, die Konkurrenz hat halt auch extrem geschlafen. Aber EA hat mit Battlefield überhaupt nicht geschlafen und das wollen wir uns heute anschauen. Davor noch ein kleiner Reminder, bei SCUF gibt es für die Black Weeks immer noch aktuell bis Dezember 20% Rabatt auf alle meine Controller. Egal, ob ihr euch jetzt einen holt, der direkt fertig gebaut ist, für die Xbox, für den PC, für die Playstation, es gibt für alle Plattformen Controller. Oder wenn ihr euch einen im Konfigurator selbst erstellt. Ich würde euch sagen, beziehungsweise ich kann euch sagen, welchen Controller ich spiele. Das ist der SCUF Reflex FPS. Quasi der PlayStation 5 SCUF-Controller, den kann man auch noch übertakten dann quasi auf dem PC, wenn man damit spielt. Geht auf PC und auf PlayStation-Ebene, nur auf Xbox leider nicht. Und dort habe ich drauf meine eigene Faceplate, das ist mein Design hier. Ich habe den linken Thumbstick, beziehungsweise ich habe die TMR-Thumbsticks drin, das sind die keinen Stickdrift bekommen, sich richtig clean anfühlen. Nochmal deutlich besser als die normalen Hall-Effect-Sticks. Linken Thumbstick habe ich short-domed, also abgerundet oben. Rechten Thumbstick habe ich long und konkav, wo man seinen Daumen reinlegen kann zum Aimen, absolut perfekt. Dann habe ich Instant-Trigger eingebaut, das sind diese Mausklick-Trigger. Damit kann man richtig schön schnell auch schießen und es fühlt sich einfach richtig geil an. Außerdem bekommt man dann die Instant Buttons, also das Steuerkreuz und diese 4 Knöpfe hier auch in Mausklick kostenlos mit dazu. Und genau, das könnt ihr gerne abchecken mit dem Code STYLERZ 20% sparen. Absoluter Meta-Controller, so wie er da ist, so spiele ich ihn auch. Aber ich würde sagen, wir gehen rein ins Video.
Battlefield has beaten Call of Duty for the first time. This has never happened before in the history of Electronic Arts and it's never happened before in the history of Battlefield. Even with super successful titles like Battlefield 1, this franchise has always been living in the shadow of Call of Duty. But in the same year where it was rumored that Call of Duty believed that they were too big to fail, it looks like they finally have. Now this video is not a post-mortem on Black Ops 7, and it's definitely not another tribal attempt at, hating on a game for its existence. Lots of people enjoy Black Ops 7, it's not for me personally, but if you do enjoy it, good for you. In this case, we're going to be talking about what this newfound success means for Battlefield, what it means for the future of not only Battlefield 6, but also probably the next game, Battlefield 7, and also talk about just how crazy this is. Now, I'm going to start with a statistic that is going to blow your mind. Battlefield 1 sold around 20 to 30 million copies, and we're talking about the Battlefield 1, the game that had one of the most viewed video game trailers of all time.
Boah, der Trailer war so geil.
Well in terms of online sentiment.
Ich glaube auch, dass Battlefield 1 trotzdem die meisten Leute nicht so abgeholt hat, weil das Setting halt einfach Erster Weltkrieg ist. Klar, war wirklich geil und es war auch echt ein cooles Spiel, aber ich glaube, die Leute sind schon so, die wollen dieses Moderne haben. Deshalb verstehe ich schon, dass es nicht Call of Duty outsellt hat damals.
Universally raved about as being a fantastic shooter. That game sold around 20 to 30 million copies and went up against a Call of Duty at the time that wasn't particularly popular in Advanced Warfare, but still didn't even get anywhere near close to outselling them that year. So you might be wondering, well, just how successful is Battlefield 6 then? Well, Battlefield 6 outsold all of Battlefield 1. The 20 to 30 million copies that Battlefield 1 had sold in its entire life cycle in just October 2025. We are talking about a game that sold 7 million copies in 3 days and then managed to grow that to in between 20 to 30 million copies in October alone, which is incredibly impressive. And to give you an idea of just how impressive
Das hier steht auch die Schlagzeile, ne? Ich habe schon wieder vergessen, das ist mir mit dem letzten Video auch schon passiert, schon wieder vergessen, die Cam dann hier nach oben rechts wieder zu packen, nachdem ich dieses kleine Scuff-Integration aufgenommen habe. Es kann nicht so schwer sein. Call of Duty Black Ops 7 stumbles in European launch. Sales 63% below Battlefield 6. Das ist verrückt. Absolut verrückt.
Impressive this is, Battlefield 6 has produced the highest single-month US digital and physical sales for a game in the last 3 years. And the only game that got more than that was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in October 2022. And whilst Modern Warfare 2 in 2022 ended up having really negative online sentiment and backlash in terms of its integration, in terms of it handled Warzone and how things worked on that front, the actual game itself in terms of sales and popularity when it first launched was incredibly popular. In fact, it was the entire peak of search volume for Call of Duty Warzone and for Modern Warfare as a franchise when it released. So we're talking about a game that is an absolute colossus, and Battlefield 6 has managed to get even close to that. And this is even more impressive when you consider that Battlefield 6 is only on the current generation of consoles, being PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S. It isn't on PS.
Das gibt es gar nicht auf PS4 und so, ne? Krass.
It isn't on Xbox One. It is an entire generational shift away from that. And in Europe, Battlefield outsold Call of Duty Black Ops 7 by 63%.
That's
an absolutely massive margin that now means that as a franchise, Battlefield has outsold and probably has a larger player count than Call of Duty does. Now again, this isn't a hit piece on Black Ops 7. Black Ops 7 hasn't sold well for a number of reasons that have generally a lot more culturally to do with the FPS space than it actually has to do about the product itself. Now, obviously, there are flaws with that title, but there's just a whole plethora of reasons as to why this has come about. And a lot of the successes for Battlefield 6 this year that we're going to touch on are essentially reasons that Call of Duty has slid backwards. But what does this all mean for Battlefield 6? Well, the first and foremost thing is that it probably means that we're not going to see a successor to Battlefield 6 for probably 3 to 4 years, if I was to guess.
Sag mal, was ist denn hier mit YouTube los gerade eigentlich? Wieso lädt das hier nicht gescheit vor? Mach doch mal hier... Hallo.
Plenty of articles online discussing how Battlefield could become an annual franchise or potentially move to biannual releases, but I don't think that's going to be the case at all. If anything, selling this level of volume and doing this well in terms of general success means that following up with something immediately close by afterwards is only going to sink anticipation. And on top of that, it's a validating experience for EA. EA deliberately gave Battlefield more resources this year, combining multiple studios like Motive, Ripple Effect, Criterion, and DICE, just to name a few, gave them the tools and things that they needed to make a successful multi-range product, and launched a free-to-play element, and did all of that whilst giving the game developers as much time as humanly possible, with a dev window of around 3 to 4 years. Granted, Battlefield 6 still probably could have gotten even better with more time, but if anything, this probably tells the higher-ups at EA and the higher-ups across these development teams that the more time that Battlefield is given, the more likely success is going to be achieved. And it also means that EA's multi-studio approach, which has a Battlefield central tech team which handles all of the engine stuff, and then multiple other development teams working on things like maps, single player, and different assets.
Das ist echt gut, dass sie das so gemacht haben.
A constructive approach to go for in the future. And that means giving all of these development teams lots of time to do so while still sustaining Battlefield 6 as a post-launch project. Which essentially means that 1 or 2 development teams are going to have to be left behind working on Battlefield 6 and producing new content over the next couple of years and seasons, and the other development teams are going to have to shift their focus onto the next title, which I personally don't believe is going to release until around about 2028 or 2029. Because at a very basic formula, why change the formula? Battlefield 6 worked incredibly well because they took their time, they threw lots of studios at it, they gave those studios resources to do so, and the only hiccup really for Battlefield 6 was the single-player experience, which was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of reviews.
Das war scheiße. Die Kampagne war wirklich nicht gut.
Somewhat changed and manipulated by the fact that there was a change of hands in terms of who was running that show and what dev teams were working on it. And there was some drama in the background that we aren't familiar entirely with the details of. So at a very basic level, it means that you're probably not going to see another Battlefield for quite some time, and it probably means you're going to see a pretty concise effort on post-launch content for Battlefield 6, considering it already has a large user base. So potentially, in my view, I'm saying maybe 2 to 3 years of live service support, multiple maps, multiple seasons. This game has sold well enough to justify long-term online support for it, which probably does mean some more aggressive monetization coming our way. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Battlefield 6 is not selling a premium pass like back in the day, and people do forget that historically we were paying £15 to £20 every single season to unlock new maps. Maps are coming for free now, weapons are coming for free now, and the offsetting damage of that for companies to continue to make profit is to sell in-game cosmetics. And I think there's lots of great examples online of how Battlefield can commit to in-game cosmetics that fit the universe and keep it grounded and keep it selling well without them necessarily having to go over the top or sort of Fortniteify their own title in order to achieve the sales.
Ich hoffe, es kriegen Sinn halt, ne?
And so long as content continues to keep pumping for free, people like myself and plenty of other people who play Battlefield are more than happy to buy the odd cosmetic bundle if it means that all of the actual core content that counts is completely free for the next couple of years. The two big takeaways here is that Battlefield 6 is probably here to stay, and Battlefield 7, or whatever it ends up being called, is probably a fairly far time away. But let's take a step back and talk about why Battlefield 6 has been so successful. Why is this happening for the first time? You know, we are talking about a franchise that's been around for a really long time now, but has never been able to see this level of mainstream success. Now, the first thing for me is that the first...
Ich glaube, dass da wirklich, also Battlefield hat einfach gekocht, meine Meinung, bevor er jetzt seine sagt. Battlefield hat gekocht mit Battlefield 6, also EA hat gekocht mit diesem Game. Es ist wirklich einfach sehr gut geworden und macht sehr viel Spaß. Die Leute sind abgeholt, die Tonalität ist da, die DNA von Battlefield wird damit wirklich auch einfach gut umgesetzt und die Leute fühlen sich da, die Core-Community fühlt sich gut repräsentiert, glaube ich, von den Entscheidungen, die da getroffen wurden. Und im gleichen Moment hat Call of Duty natürlich einfach so lange reingekackt und hat denen natürlich auch einen Markt geboten, wo alle Leute also sich einfach nur abholen lassen wollen. Also ich glaube, dass in einer Zeit, wo Call of Duty absolut hoch angesehen ist und alles richtig geil funktioniert, dass der Battlefield Launch dann weniger gut ausgefallen wäre als das. Weil so ist halt dieses Jahr, wie oft ich die Frage bekommen habe, per Instagram-DM, in meinem Twitch-Livestream, in Kommentaren, sonst wo, hey, was soll ich mir holen, Battlefield oder Call of Duty? Weil zweimal 80 € in einem Monat auszugeben, das sind 160 €. Das ist einfach saumäßig viel Geld mittlerweile. Und Leute haben sich dann halt einfach mal gedacht, so, nee, ich hole mir dieses Jahr kein Call of Duty, weil es sieht wieder so langweilig aus wie die letzten Jahre und ich fühle mich ein bisschen verarscht von dem Franchise, ich hole mir jetzt Battlefield. Und Battlefield hat ein gutes Produkt abgeliefert, das heißt, die Leute haben es weitererzählt, die Leute sind positiv überrascht davon und es funktioniert einfach. Und dementsprechend passiert dann eben so etwas. Und das ist super. Absolut super. Als jemand, der möchte, dass wir im First-Person-Shooter-Segment einfach gute Videospiele bekommen, sehe ich es gerne, wenn eine große Macht in dieser Industrie, die jetzt wirklich jahrelang machen konnte, was sie wollte, damit einfach mal nicht durchkommt. Weiter geht's.
Is that the first-person shooter landscape has completely changed. If you look online now, we're mostly looking at predominantly high-stakes shooters, extraction shooters, competitive shooters, and what I would generally classify as just a sweaty FPS space. And that is honestly something that I feel has radically changed how people approach shooters and has ultimately given Battlefield 6 success. At a very basic level, the majority of shooters online now are sweaty experiences that you can't really relax whilst playing, and when somebody gets home from work, the last thing they're thinking about is bouncing around a ranked lobby for the most part. And because of that, I genuinely believe that Battlefield 6 is the first shooter in probably the last 5 to 6 years that you can genuinely sit down on your sofa with your friends with a headset on and just have fun. You don't have to be getting lots of kills, you don't have to win every single game, you can just mess around with your friends, blow some stuff up, heal some people, and have a good time.
Yeah.
Around about a year ago in the lead up to Battlefield 6, I told a number of people who were working on the game and in the feedback sessions that I was providing them that the world needed a Battlefield game. You know, and that wasn't a joke. That wasn't me overestimating how successful this title could be. It was me genuinely recognizing that, for the most part, there is just no FPS game out there right now that you can chill and play. And Arc Raiders has swung around and somehow managed to bridge the gap between being fun, enjoyable, and somewhat casual without being too sweaty. And Battlefield has come around and they've done the same thing. And honestly, as much as this is something that most people would just associate with Battlefield by default, it really deserves a lot of recognition. Just how masterful it is to have a game that's in the wild where winning, losing, dying, getting lots of kills doesn't necessarily matter anymore. It's just about having fun, it's just about enjoying yourself, doing dumb things with your friends, and that's what Battlefield does incredibly well. And if you look around, can you honestly say that you can play Black Ops 7 on a sofa with your feet kicked up watching TV? No.
Trotz weniger Serious Matchmaking ist die Lobbys sind bei mir unfassbar krass verwertet.
And can you say that you've been able to do that for most shooters over the last 5 to 6 years? The answer is no. Maybe the early days of Call of Duty Warzone, maybe sometimes the Fortnite casual situation, but for the most part, there hasn't been a grounded military shooter that you can just play with your friends without worrying around bouncing off of walls, without worrying about sweating, without worrying about getting lots of kills. It's just a fun experience. So genuinely having a couch play shooter for the first time in probably 5 to 6 years is fantastic for Battlefield. And they've managed to balance this really well whilst addressing other chronic pain points
Wiederum weggeleckt ist, was war das
in
denn?
the online space. Battlefield's Javelin anti-cheat, for example, despite not necessarily being a silver bullet to most cheating, I have played 220 hours of Battlefield 6, including RedSec, and the only cheaters I've encountered have been in RedSec, and I've only encountered 2 of them in 220 hours.
Ich habe auch nur ein Cheater-Team in
Battlefield
Royale bisher
it was
getestet.
nearly every game or nearly every other game. In terms of crossplay, mouse and keyboard players have been talking about the fact that for years now, it feels as though controller players have such a significant advantage that they can't compete anymore. And for once, Battlefield has taken a very balanced approach, in my opinion, as a mixed input player who plays incredibly well on keyboard and mouse and on controller, that actually allows both input devices to thrive without feeling the need to pick one or the other, because the game simply says, you know what, have fun with whatever device you're using. And finally, the server situation. Now, Battlefield 6 definitely still has some netcode issues and some time-to-death issues and dying around corner issues and a few bugs here and there. And that is definitely something that is worth talking about. But its closest competitor has had all of these issues and more for the last 3 to 5 years, and probably accounts for a good reason as to why sales are 63% lower. Now, for me personally, as somebody who has watched both of these franchises do incredibly well, and watched them both do incredibly badly, Battlefield has managed to masterfully allow people to play casually whilst addressing the biggest issues for engaged players online, all whilst being incredibly casual and allowing you to have fun with your friends. And then there's a whole nother layer on top of that, and I don't think this really gets talked about enough, but Battlefield is just Battlefield, and Battlefield is cinematic and cool, and has these incredible moments that I think, people don't really recognize and appreciate. During the release month for Battlefield 6, my entire social media timeline, my Instagram reels, pretty much everything was just cool clips of stuff happening in-game. And it spread like wildfire, and in fact, some of my best performing short-form content for Battlefield 6 was just helicopters spinning out and detonating, buildings getting knocked down, tanks popping off and exploding. And it's just moments that you don't really get to see in other shooters that naturally occur in Battlefield that I think makes the franchise unique and makes...
Ich habe letztens dieses eine Video, ich hoffe, ihr habt es vielleicht gesehen, aufgenommen, wo ich 2 Runden Battlefield gespielt habe und alleine in diesen 2 Runden ist so viel passiert, was einfach nicht passieren würde in Call of Duty oder in anderen Shootern. Also so viel cooler Stuff, das solltet ihr euch eigentlich echt anschauen. Das ist auf meinem Kanal, das Video, von vor so 4, 5 Tagen oder sowas, vielleicht vor einer Woche schon. Richtig cooles Video geworden.
Incredibly special. And I'm glad it's finally getting that attention. As a Battlefield fan, it feels like we've been talking about this stuff since Battlefield 3 and 4, and people just couldn't see it. Predominantly because in Battlefield 3 and 4, this was the age before social media. And it was really only in Battlefield 1 when people started recognizing things that Battlefield was doing in terms of cinematic gameplay, in terms of, recognizing that there were these really cool moments that could only happen in that game and in that franchise. But the World War I setting of Battlefield 1 was enough to put enough people off of actually trying that experience. So Battlefield 6 swings along, it's a modern shooter, it can basically run on a toaster if you've got a PC that's pretty underpowered, and it does all of those things that Battlefield 1 did to an extent, but now exists in a social media age where people are messing around, having fun, and posting clips. And the final thing is
einfach moderner Shooter.
I think Battlefield did a really good job of recognizing that the first-person shooter market was pretty tired of seeing, you know, guns that have been, you know, turned into different franchises and collaborations that had taken over the world. And it seems like every single video game now has movies, TV shows, and social media pop culture just shoved into it in order to make money. So Battlefield came along and just released a military shooter that looked like a military shooter, which, you know, if you're somebody my age at 27, you know, those are the games I grew up on. For those of you who are older than me, you might remember very fondly Call of Duty World at War, COD 4, Modern Warfare 2, you know, first-person shooter games that built an aesthetic that was very aesthetically pleasing and didn't move away from those aesthetics that allowed you to enjoy those worlds for what they were. And whilst Battlefield 6 is going to grapple with this problem in the future, and I'm sure they're going to have to be very careful and meticulous about what cosmetics that they put into the game and how they market them, it is just something that they did incredibly successfully at the release of this game. And if they can continue to keep those cosmetics grounded and continue to keep them in a universe that makes sense, I think plenty of people will gladly get behind them and gladly even purchase them if they're worth their while. So folks, that's about it for this video today, and a real insight into how Battlefield 6 has managed to basically take the Internet by storm.
Aber ja, ich sehe es tatsächlich sehr ähnlich wie er und ich freue mich einfach extrem darauf und ich bin auch sehr gespannt, was das halt einfach für Auswirkungen hat, ne? Das ist ja, am Ende des Tages sind solche Ereignisse ja nicht einfach nur, jo, das ist jetzt so passiert, fertig, jetzt geht alles weiter wie davor, sondern es ist wirklich ein großer Einschnitt in diese Industrie und in diesen Markt und ich bin gespannt, was sich die einzelnen Firmen, was EA damit anfängt jetzt, aber was auch Activision damit anfängt. Und ja, bin sehr gespannt, was die Zukunft da bringt. In diesem Sinne, schaut bei SCUF vorbei, lasst ein Like da, lasst ein Abo da und dann sehen wir uns im nächsten Video oder im nächsten Livestream. Haut da rein. Ciao, ciao.